to do in UK than anywhere else. So, like I said before, we're influenced by what we're exposed to and the experience, and we try as much as possible to shy away from a bias in inheritance. Yeah. So we we're just trying, like especially this society, we're just trying to educate people as much as possible and kind of stop what's going on. Obviously, you've seen America and all those kind of things. So I'm going to stick with the 1980s and just the important things that happened between them and why people could have been made racist. And then obviously we're going to open the floor to an actual discussion. So in the 1980s, so the N word, obviously all of you have heard it. I mean, I've used it myself. But during that time, it was used way too often. So, and also ethnic minorities were discriminated against. And it kind of began the start of the complete disregard for the Windrush generation after you've seen UK's mass post-war immigration in the attempt to bring the country back into fighting against a fascist racist leader who you should know is Hitler. So now, 4 years later, UK is deciding to segregate these immigrants that they've brought in and pass laws that make them to treat them differently. So obviously, this is ironic. So racism and anti-racism, they have complete. Racism is mostly a complete contempt for the poor, right? And it's like a disdain for learning in the top universities. Like, what I mean by this is with racism, we can quite easily attribute it to class. So obviously, at the moment, you see the top 1% or so, or even 0.1%, we see are predominantly white at this current moment in time. And I think if you saw Alex talk, it was mostly to do with racism came from the senior, what we have as like the top of people, top 1%, and it goes down. It was a complete disregard for those of lower class, obviously. So even the historians that we have, like our history teachers, not everything, we would say ethically that with a football person, if a fan threw an insult at a football Premier League, that's a bad thing. But then they then go on to teaching others about mass murder, white supremacists. Because I know in history we obviously talked about what is it called? USA during that time, the KKK and all those kind of things. But I think it's the fact that we haven't really, we know that it's bad and we inherently think that it's bad, but we haven't really talked about it as much and what effect that had on society as a whole. Like I know, especially like I said in history, we talked about the KKK, but it was kind of like a forbidden topic per se. No one wanted to talk about it. Like how we'd have the sex talk back in the back in time, right? And everyone think that was taboo, but this kind of topic about racism, it's kind of people keep it as taboo throughout the whole life and never actually address it. All right, Ryan.
Okay, so obviously it seems that throughout all of history you've had this kind of poor people racism is bad, rich people racism can almost be accepted and thought of as it's just business. And it seems like the society we live in is...
What do you mean by rich people and poor people racism?
So when you have poor people, like with the football fanatics, they say, they shout the N-word at a football player, then obviously it's a very bad thing, they get banned from the football matches, all of this. But you have these historians who spend a lot of their careers studying this history, but they're never truly addressing the racism of the white supremacy, and it almost leads to the whole Churchill situation where people say, yeah, he saved us, but then no one actually addresses concentration camps in Kenya and stuff like that. And also at the moment we live in a society where, especially in the West, the majority of leaders and even politicians and stuff like that, they are white. And the only people who can find it psychologically possible to deny any race privilege are those who are racially privileged. And it's those who race is invisible because the world is almost structured around them, and the society we live in is built on this whiteness, again, which is a ground against which other races almost are compared against. And there's a quote where it says that whiteness is a phenomenon unthinkable in a context where white does not equal power at some structural level. And the main thing is, in the 80s, the government was explicitly racist. So they had a 1981 British Nationality Act, which basically stripped any previous British Commonwealth citizen of their British citizenship. Their British passport meant nothing anymore. And obviously that was the whole Windrush generation, where people were sent back despite the fact they'd lived in the country for 40, 50 years, and then they were just like, well, no, you're an illegal immigrant and stuff like that. The act can still be read on the UK government website, and you can see all the little things where it says you have to be married to a British citizen, or you have to be married to an army, someone who's involved in the army, otherwise you're no longer a British citizen. It is very explicitly segregating these immigrants who came in, helped build the NHS and the public transport, and then once they were done with them, they were like, well, we don't need you anymore. Also during the 1980s, there was an assessment called the LEAs, where they went through schools in London and just assessed different ethnic groups and just generally assessed different schools as to how they were doing. And they found that black people would start primary school 20 points above the national average. They would leave primary school 21 points below the national average. So obviously, this was a government funded assessment. They got this information. They did not do anything about it. In fact, what they did was they changed the tests so that there was more of an opinionated input by teachers. And then magically, with these new tests, whites decided to start performing better than blacks. So when you have teachers who grow up during the 1940s and 50s, and obviously there was racism back then, they have this inherent bias that black people are going to be so-called dumber. And in the same way that with these new tests, Asian people actually, their performance increased because supposedly their stereotype is, oh, you're clever. So it does work both ways, and these new tests were called FSPs. And then in the 2000s, some more independent studies were done, and they found the same results as the LEAs back then. So generally, the contribution of the British government during the 1980s, during that time, was firstly racist police. So you can ask almost any coloured person who grew up in the 1980s, they will have experienced some form of racism. They almost certainly will have been beaten up by some kind of police. I know a few black uncles who, grew up back then, and they completely just were beaten up at least twice every month and stuff like that. During the 1980s, MPs actually debated within Parliament whether or not they would keep the non-British Caribbean citizens. So if you live in a society where MPs are actually having an ongoing debate as to whether black people should be kept in the country, when you see a black person, it does change your perspective. And my thing is, when people try and defend that almost point of view, it seems to me, and this is me giving my opinion, it seems to me as if they're trying to be, or I'm very strong-willed, if it was me, I wouldn't see them differently, which I think is an interesting point of view to take. The one thing that I did a lot of research, I did about an hour of research trying to find out what the UK has done to try and combat racism since the 1980s in terms of actual acts or laws that tried to go against it. And the only thing I could find was the Equality Act of 2010, which brought together a lot of different acts throughout the 1980s and 1990s, which basically tried to combat discrimination only in the workplace, but didn't make anything illegal. So it tried to encourage employers to put biases aside, and it tried to just make sure, it tried to basically tell employers, if you have a lot of white people, please try and bring in some more coloured people. There was
Mahmoud brothers joining Sydney that side of school. Is that fine if I admit him?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So there was no crime as in to say, oh, you don't have enough coloured people. And the only places where they said if you specifically discriminate against people is like obviously in the movie industry where you require an actual colour of an actor and stuff like that. And the question I think a lot of people put forward in 2010 was, should they have maybe put in some quotas? Should they force companies to actually bring in coloured people? Or if a company is actually significantly underrepresenting an ethnic group, should they be investigated? So generally, throughout the whole of the 1980s up to the modern day, the UK government has done a lot to contribute to racism, but not a lot to combat it. That is me done.
All right. So, I mean, first of all, I want to open. Does anyone have any comments to say about that before?
Yeah,
Try
go for it.
conclusion? Go.
So I'm just thinking about what you said, right? Because actually a lot of it is quite interesting. I had a few thoughts. The first one was about like the sort of rich versus poor racism sort of stuff. 'Cause I
Yeah.
found that quite an interesting thought that I never sort of thought of really. That the racism is seen differently depending on your sort of
Class.
class. Yeah. Um, and I mean, the way I would have looked at that before, and I probably still do see it sort of, is actually the difference between types of racism, not as class, but as interpersonal and institutional. So the way I would see, for example, the example you gave, the hooligan shouting racist slurs at, say, a footballer, would be sort of interpersonal racism, where someone's having a personal attack on someone else. But with the sort of rich person racism with history and that would be sort of institutional,
Yeah.
where that's actually something that's, there's a system designed for other people who have. And I mean, I guess the real question is, what do we have more of in Britain right now, and what is the real? I mean, obviously, I'd say the real problem is always going to be institutional, but what do we have more of? And I mean, no, I guess
I think
interpersonal
the
is all.
interpersonal racism is caused by the institutional, because racism was never came from working class people. Racism originally came from rich white people trying to exploit black people in Africa for the stuff that they had.
Yeah.
And so, because working class people now, they're the ones who are like, oh, they're the racist ones, watch out for them. But the only reason they're racist is because they grew up and their parents grew up in a time where the government was racist, and they know people who were involved in government, and they read these newspaper headlines of questioning the black Caribbeans and stuff like that. And the interesting thing is, in America, when people originally colonized America and they found it had lots of oil, lots of minerals and stuff like that, and they made lots of money out of it, no one went to enslave the American people. But Africa had a lot of minerals, oils, cotton and stuff like that, and then Europeans decided we're going to enslave those people, which I think is an
So,
interesting thing to
so you're
look at.
saying it's like all comes from institutional racism is what really causes interpersonal, like poor people racism, but
Yeah.
Yeah, because
I-
interpersonal racism, obviously racism is not taught, and interpersonal racism comes from having an original reason as to why to be racist. Obviously,
I mean, yeah.
you can have those fans where they look at a Premier League player, they're annoyed they scored a goal, so they just come out with whatever insult they can come out with. But if it was actually taught to them that you don't ever say this word no matter what someone does to you, then they wouldn't say the word.
I mean, at
I
the
think.
same
Go.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, I sort of think of like, when you think of like poor people raised in Britain, you're always thinking of that sort of like
EDL
fat
stuff
white
like that.
hooligan
Yeah.
character and like the North sort of, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like the sort of racism that seems to come from them is always one of
That's not real
as
racism. That's just bigotry. That's sort of just an ideology which is being like fed to them. They've been like brainwashed to believe like a certain idea, and they just like reiterate, regurgitate things which are being brainwashed to them. But it's not like
it comes
it's
from
not actual
arrogance.
racism like, where like you actually believe in like some pseudoscience that like there's actually a racial hierarchy, and one person is like superior to another.
No, but that raises the question of the definition of racism, which is like
No, racism. No, it has to be like actual like belief. Like it can't just be like a bit of bigotry, like where I'm just
yeah,
saying like,
it doesn't
oh,
seem like they, it seems like they believe that they are superior because of they're British and all this patriotism. It doesn't come from it. It comes from a self superiority. So it's not just, not just bigotry. I mean, to be fair, racism is just a subset of bigotry. Wouldn't you say?
yeah, I'd say so. It comes from the same almost family tree as all the other discriminations. But the only
Yeah,
difference between racism and the other ones is that racism was almost a economy at one point.
Yeah.
That's the main thing that I mean. You shouldn't really be comparing struggles. Like you shouldn't compare racism and sexism, but sexism was only ever okay. Women should be in the house doing this stuff, whereas racism was these people are inferior. We should torture them, and we are going to enslave them and exploit them. There's
Yeah, so it's a scale of bigotry, it's a
yeah.
scale of so. Um, Ahmed, you're muted. Ahmed, you're muted, fam.
Yeah.
It might not be helpful that your entire family seems to be with you as well. That's
I just told him to join because like he's interested in these kinds of stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Ahmed, if you
no.
got something to say, you can like type it in the chat and then I'll read it out.
um,
Bro, so you can
No,
No. I'll talk. You know what
right.
it was? It's because I was giving them directions. Because I was giving my family directions. Because we couldn't hack the roads. We're in the same roundabout, about 6 loops in the same roundabout. But I was hearing what you're saying. And it's good that you guys talked about economics as well, because racism at the end of the day is an economic arrangement, and we have to see it in those sort of terms. We have to, if we're going to discuss it, we have to talk about why it exists. And the reason that it exists is because it's so profitable. So in almost every sector, so prisons,
but
policing, war, it goes into so many sectors of society. At the moment that it becomes more profitable to be anti-racist than racist, you see more anti-racism going on. So nowadays, all these companies that are coming out with like a black screen and stuff to try and show how woke they are, trying to get people to buy their products. So to an extent, they're being anti-racism. Obviously, they'll still be like employing like work, like Nike will come out and like endorse Kaepernick, still employ workers in India for like £1 a day. They can't employ white workers for £1 a day. So that's a racial economic arrangement.
Okay. I
That's
think.
fine, but at least publicly they have to be anti-racist. So that is a progress in a way. Go on, yeah.
Oh, now I was just gonna bring it up with Sonny's point. Just bring it to the table. So he talks about how is racism and sexism not similar to each other when at both times people are being looked down upon.
uh, seems to be a
I think
skewing person.
No.
they're similar in some respects, but they're different in some
Yeah, I think the
respects.
scales.
In
It's
terms of
scales.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say it is scales because obviously I'm not trying to be here and be like, oh, racism is a
To be
bigger
fair,
problem.
no one said it's not similar. We just said we shouldn't compare.
Yeah. First of all, I don't think you
should.
should compare these struggles, but I think the difference between the two is how much racism was exploited.
No, but I think the justifications for each is similar. Like the justification for racism or sexism is that these people are inferior
Yeah.
in things that matter. So they can't. For example, like they don't have the ability. Like even if we gave them the
But you
opportunity,
talk about racism being profitable, right? So that's what you say the main
they wouldn't have the
motivation.
ability to succeed. So we might as well just subjugate them. Yeah.
No, but you said that the main. Your internet is like 5 miles behind, bro. No. I said you said that racism is primarily economically motivated, right? Profit. But the thing is,
I wouldn't say primarily, but I'd say that's the main reason it still exists. But I think when it started, it wasn't as much. But nowadays, the reason it's still being perpetuated is economics. But back
So-
then, like when it first started, I don't think that was the main reason. I think it
Yeah.
was like it started off from like the intellectuals and like philosophers of the time and stuff. And then now,
So actual
it's like
bigotry. That would be actually bigotry. But the thing that like with your point that you're saying about nowadays it's just because it's profitable. That raises the question: is it actually racism because is it actually bigoted, or is it just people trying to make profit out where they can make profit?
I'll give an example. For example, I think most of us would say, for example, that what Donald Trump has said in the past is like Islamophobic, right? Would we agree on that, right?
Yeah.
So we would say that Donald Trump has a phobia of Muslims. Now, can it be explained? Can it be explained that someone with a phobia of Muslims would sell $200 billion worth of weaponry to Saudi Arabia, or not only a Muslim country, but the most extreme form of so-called theocracy? So how can someone who's Islamophobic not be scared enough to the level of giving them this high-tech weaponry? So that shows that even though he might say something publicly that is Islamophobic. Deep in his heart, it
So
probably doesn't share that
the
sentiment.
rich are
Because
actually
here's the
the rich
thing,
have money, like good quality and stuff. Because they're
and I
only
think
like,
I think that's the message we need to share. Like, if you look at rich people, they're all united. Like they're all sitting down having their meetings in the United Nations or whatever. You get people from Africa, people from Asia, people from America. Everyone, they're all united, men, women, LGBT. They all talk about all this great stuff, and the people, most people, poor people, working class people, middle class people, they're the ones that are divided. And so we need to have the same unity that they have. Like if we were as united as them, I think things would be better.
I mean, a lot of the time you actually find a lot of unitedness within. Well, okay. This is not a really necessarily 100% correct point I'm going to make, but when I look around at sort of working class, say Birmingham or like London, right, you see a lot of um like not racist. How am I posing this? But you've got a lot of unity between like people who are in the same sort of class in terms of
Of course,
yeah,
of
because
Yeah,
course.
you get like white people
like
hanging with black people. Like it's usually you see like rap culture is like mainly black. But you do get white people in there, and there is a lot of people aren't usually racist when in the working class. You find a lot of it. I feel in the middle class,
You know what it is? You know what it is?
but at the same
There's
time
two
there's the
kinds.
hooligans sort of.
There's two kinds of. This is the biggest division in Britain. People who live in cities and people who live in small towns.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
people who
yeah,
live in, say, working class people who live in London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow, they're not going to be racist because they've had the interaction with the people who are from immigrant backgrounds. But the
yeah.
people who live in, let's say, where I'm in right now, Swindon, there's not that many people who are black or brown or so on. So the small towns, so like, when you see the map in like the election or whatever, you've got like all the cities are like Labour, all the cities are like Remain, and then like the bits, all this like countryside, this like all blue for Brexit or Conservative, whatever. And these are the places that are the most anti-immigration, but they've had the least immigration.
Mm,
So
And I think
these
for
places
me,
where, because
or well, fortunately or unfortunately, I have now had experience of both schools, one of which is 95% ethnic minority and one of which is 95% white. It does seem that in Birmingham you don't have racism within working class people, but at my new school, I've had conversations with people who try to suggest that the reason black people are arrested more is because there are more black people in poverty. When you look at the facts, there's 3.3 million white people in poverty and only 200,000 black people in poverty. So I think with the middle class people, it is very much they look at their government, and because obviously they're middle class, they're more likely to be Tory. And when you have a Conservative Party that is, whether you want to believe it or not, they have a lot of racist comments and policies. Then they support this party. The party comes forward saying a lot of different things. Then they kind of just say what they want to say without actually being educated on the facts. So sometimes you have these conversations with people
yeah,
where they're trying to make a point of, oh, racism isn't that big a deal. And I'm fine if you want to make that point, but have some actual argument behind it. And I think that's the difference. Working class people, they see the actual situation that coloured people are in, because most coloured people are in poverty. But these middle class people don't see it, so they just assume what they want to assume.
I mean, it comes from a lack of education, like a lack of experience in life, really.
Yeah.
Because when you're not,
division, yeah.
yeah. Because if you don't know, then you are more likely to take what you have and only what you have, and for them it's going to be the news, the media, the experience. I'd say experience, news, media, and the government, right? And this is their only source of information. That's what they latch onto. When you have a more varied experience in life, living in a city, meeting other people who are not from your background, who don't share the same culture, you get different points of view, and you question these sort of set in stone axioms of your life, such as what all black people are, this, that sort of stuff. And that's why I think you don't get that sort of but yeah, in terms of racism within the lower class, it is different between small towns and big cities. And but when you look at yeah, yeah, I think that's the main point I really wanted to make. But to be fair, the working class in small towns are less sort of working class, if you get what I mean. So I would say they're more middle class anyway. But it is what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, definitely. I think the problem is like, there's a big division between like the inner cities and who like have these struggles that are not the same as the struggles of the people who live in the suburbs and the middle class towns around the cities that represent a lot of people that they look at the city and then they think, oh, the reason that the cities are so much crime or so much poverty, they think the reason that that exists is because of all the immigration, and so they blame the failure on immigration. And I think like one of the things that we're going to have to address in the next few years, like decades probably, is like what route the country going to take. Because it's either going to have to be really, really anti-immigration, or it's going to have to like embrace more like socialistic sort of policies to like deal with the white working class, like the so because there's going to be Asian population, loads of old white people. They're going to see worse quality schools, worse quality NHS, worse quality welfare, and then they're going to be angry. So how are you going to deal with all those angry people? Either you're going to pay money and spend money to give services that are going to help them, or you're going to have to convince them that all their problems are. You're just going to have to make everyone hate Muslims a bit more, or be a bit more scared of black people. Even with the UK, we don't even have enough. It's not like America where there's a large population of like people of color. Here in the UK, it's not even that many. So it's going to be a tough task for the media, but I'm
Yeah.
sure they'll be up to it.
And I think when you have the working class people, I'm going to address your point, Sonny, with this. When you have these working class people like Tommy Robinson and the EDL who live in London, I wouldn't be surprised if you actually look at their backgrounds. They come from the parts of London that are mainly white. You won't find someone who lives in Brixton. You won't find a white person who lives in Brixton that's racist, because if they were publicly
The EDL don't
racist,
come from London. They don't come from London. They all have to come in. Like they all have to get bussed in and they have to get trains
yeah,
to come from other parts of the country. They don't live in London.
Countryside around those.
yeah. And Sonny, I think you
Yeah.
are right with what you say with experience, because if someone does have the experience of just generally being around coloured people, whether it's even that you talk to them, but if you go into shops and your cashier's brown, you go into JD Sports and I don't know, the cashier's black or something, you see loads of people who are coloured around you. You no longer think, oh, these people are different to
I
me.
think even guys who are broke, they're
Yeah,
broke people who are.
I'm not sure about that point as well though, because like I think like even within cities, you've also got division within cities between like middle class, upper middle class people who live in like gated communities, go to private schools, go to like private health clinics and stuff, and all their experience of like people of color or poor people is like, oh, my Uber driver, the guy that's like delivering my pizza, the
Yeah,
guy
that's
that's
what
like
we do.
cleaning
Yeah.
my house,
Yeah,
and then
That's true.
when that's
Does
your
that mean
only
the
experience of people,
does that mean
you're not gonna build a good relationship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
experience of people is say you're being brought up
Say that again, because your mic was going out.
me?
Yeah, say it again.
Yeah, experience like if you're being brought up and educated with people, that's probably why young people are more receptive to like more open minded to these
But yeah,
ideas. Right? So it
going
can
back
be
to Ahmed's point, it's also a class problem because looking at the people who are mainly, Asian, BAME, right? They're all freaking, we'd say lower class. But if you think about lower class, you think in a city, you think majoritively coloured, right? But when you think about middle class, upper class, you almost all immediately think white, right? And even if there are, other, coloured people, there's small. I mean, number-wise, a lot
There's a
more
lot
white.
of Indian and Chinese people who are upper middle class.
Yeah, but still, the image that comes to your head is still white, right? And their experience is not one of equals. They don't
Yeah.
have an experience that equals with them, sort of these the main individuals, and still, I mean, still looking at cities like Birmingham, we do still find that it's a lot less racism than say in a small town,
Yeah.
but it does
So
exist. Like you can't just generalize and be like
because when you're in a small town and you go shopping, you see white people, and then you see white people who are lower class. You see white people of your own class, and you just see white people. You live in Birmingham, where if you're middle class, you see these coloured people who are lower class jobs, lower paying jobs. If you're working class and you're white, you see these coloured people on the same ground as you. So
Yeah,
it is a class thing. It's almost as if like because people who are middle class, they won't go around and say, yeah, I'm middle class, but they'll know that they earn more money than certain other people. So it is once again almost looking down on, oh, those people earn less than me, oh, they're coloured.
it's just more bigotry into mind, really.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, that
people
is
always look down, but like they won't up.
Sunny's point. Let's read it. Where I do wonder if you think of middle class people when you live somewhere else, e.g., like Asia, when Asian people come up to you. Yeah,
Yeah,
of course, we're
yeah.
talking about England, aren't we?
Nah,
So,
but
You
I
say
think
that, but there's a thing like in India. There's a lot of celebrities who promote this like skin bleaching thing and
yeah,
stuff
that's
like
actually
that.
true.
So
That's true.
you can say, in Asia that you have these people that they still think the middle class is brown, but considering India was colonized by white people for ages, then you will have your grandparents telling you, "Oh, the white man's rich," and then, especially in India, you're not going to have many people who live in good areas. And so, if you're going to be poor and all you see is other Indian people, other brown people around you being poor, and then you see these adverts and stuff saying like, just bleach your skin, and these are the guys that are famous, and they're popular, then you might still have a kind of the rich people are lighter skinned than me. Maybe not white, but lighter skinned.
At the same time, I want to put another point in there that I actually read it like today, right? So basically, there's some video about some Korean people or something like that, and there's some commentators are making some points, right? And one of the thing with like Asian sort of beauty standards is that they, really appreciate paleness and double eyelid surgery. So that's why because they have like joint eyelids and they
Yeah.
like, sort of a Western sort of double eyelid, and that's seen as their beauty standards, right? And a lot of people who look at that from a Western sort of perspective, right, think that we have come in there and we have changed their beauty standards, and that's a bad thing because we're erasing their culture and
Yeah.
erasing their sort of obviously, they're trying to be white and whitewashing, but there's a quote that I'm reading out here that they make that critics ignore the intricacies of Asian culture that ultimately make double eyelid surgery an essential part of a young woman's life. Firstly, the Asian ideal of big eyes predates Western influence. For example, many people in Japan idealize the image of Akita Bijin, or beautiful women from the Akita prefecture. These women were idolized for their pale skin and double eyelid even before a single Caucasian stepped foot on the shores of the Japanese archipelago, right? And that's a quote from, I believe, The Guardian or something like that. From eyelids to skin tone, beauty isn't always about looking white. And same goes from that Maoist era in big China, in China where big eyes were the beauty standard. Same pale skin in geishas in Japan, right? So, um, and they also continue to say that does this mean that Western beauty standards aren't pervasive everywhere? No, but it's important to not make everything about white people. So at the same time, that is a point to be necessarily made that beauty being about paleness has always sort of been in a lot of cultures the standards for beauty, and even I believe in even Sally makes the point as well that even in many cultures, even around the world, Asian cultures, more dark skinned cultures, lighter skinned people have always sort of been seen as beautiful.
Yeah.
And the question is, is that a you know inherent human
And
thing?
even in Jamaica, you
Or
have like the color coding where like only mixed race people are more middle class, and like if you see a mixed race person in Jamaica, you'd assume them to be middle class. If you see a jet black person, you'd assume them to be poor living in.
and even now, people look at like lighties and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
she's a fit lighty and
Yeah,
that sort of stuff.
fully.
And
Yeah.
the question to be put there is this human or is it sort of cultural? Is it sort of
Yeah, there's a question of
political?
if you have a baby or if you have someone who grows up without any of these influences, will they still think white is like lighter skinned people are better, or not better, but more good looking, etc. And
I
then
mean, we see them in like stories, like average storybooks that what we grow up with. I know I didn't really grow up with stories with many, like let's say black people. I mean Asian people, like what we say, like Jack and Jill, bro. When you hear of Jack and Jill,
Bro,
what do you think of?
bro,
yeah,
what about Jamal? As well, bro.
Jamal.
Yeah, but
to be fair to what
really,
you're saying about like whiteness, Chinese people always saw like up until like 50 years ago or 100 years ago, Chinese people always saw whites as like barbarians, like not on the same level
But that would be because of
intellectually as Chinese
influence as
people.
well, because they see these white people attacking them and stuff like that. So that's still
No. Even before, when China was like the dominant country, they just saw white people as inferior. So that shows that it's like it's not always the case of like people
Yeah,
think
so
that
you do
whiteness
get,
is like
even now you get like white monkey sort of jobs in China where people, but that's sort of, I feel like that's less of a color thing and it's more of a
I feel like that's a bigotry
foreigners.
thing again, because if
Yeah,
China
big
was
three
that most
foreigners.
powerful country, then they look at these poor European countries and they're almost like, ha ha ha.
yeah, nah, but the thing of the difference with China is when it was the most powerful country in the world, it didn't go around colonizing everyone, whereas with
Yeah.
Europe it did. So the
Yeah.
experience of like African countries and other Asian countries, they don't have the same image of China like controlling them. But with white people, like if you just go in an airport as a someone with just wave about your British passport, wave about your American passport, they're gonna put you at the front of the queue.
Yeah.
I've had that experience myself. Like go to my own country in Egypt, talk to someone in Arabic, talk to someone in English. What do you think is more likely to get them to do the thing you want them to do? So it's like the
Yeah.
idea of like the West is a powerful idea.
There
It's
is a
gonna take a long
thing
time
in
to.
Jamaica. Okay, I'm going to reference Akala here. Akala goes to Jamaica and asks a load of Jamaican people what they think about Chinese influence, because China is actually like doing a lot of good things in Jamaica and stuff like that. So he asks them a lot of, do you have any problems with China and stuff like that? And a lot of their problems isn't that China's communist or China's Chinese and stuff like that. All of the problems they have with China are capitalist problems. So they never have a problem with China itself. They have a problem with capitalism, and then they see capitalism as a white thing. So it's like you can go to people and you can say, oh, what do you think of this person? What do you think of that person? If you actually get to the root cause of the problem, I'm guessing the root cause of many people, or even working class people who are racist, or the EDL and stuff, the root cause of the reason why they don't like black people or don't like Muslims probably is because they see them doing better than themselves.
Mm.
Yeah, like in terms of like the UK, like working class people, like they've been under attack from the government, like especially the last like 30, 40 years. Like the whole image of like champs and stuff, they themselves have been under attack from the government, and it started within the 1980s, Thatcher and stuff, getting rid of their own factories and opening up like Britain's working class to compete with people from India and China and Indonesia and compete with these people
Yeah,
for jobs
globalization.
in the world economy. And
Yeah.
a guy in Britain with all your like workers' rights like legislation and like minimum wage and stuff, you're never going to be able to compete for like
Yeah.
a shit low paying job with some guy in India.
That's why a lot of conservatives are anti-globalism, and there is a fair point to be made there. But yeah,
Yeah, so there's like two types of like right. So you've got like a reactionary anti-immigration, anti-globalization, and then you've got like the pro-globalization, pro-free trade, but they'll also be racist to you as well, to like try and hide their policies.
But I think that there is also a question where if you are anti-globalizer, if we don't have a globalized economy, is there more chance for maybe not racism but discrimination to come up, because maybe you have these countries who are better, and then they say, are we better than these other people?
Yeah,
Those other people somehow get into the country, and then they're just discriminated against because
I know.
these are the
I
people.
like globalism is its globalization is its own like major sort of issue, because from one hand, right, I can sort of understand the sort of fear of, say, okay, Pakistan, right, you've got your culture, and you value your culture, and you value the morals and ethics and things that are part of your culture, and then you get all of these people coming in. Obviously, it wouldn't happen with Pakistan if everyone's leaving instead, but
Yeah.
um, you get all these people coming in, say all these white people flooding in, and then say if it was reversed, right? That's what I'm saying, here, right? If it was reversed, you get all these white people coming in, they're taking all these jobs, and they're bringing their own cultures. They bring their own cultures and bring their own values and things that we don't necessarily agree with in Pakistan, and you sort of see you from the sidelines your own culture sort of getting erased. And from your own country,
But the
your own
difference
home.
with that is, in the UK, they brought in immigrants to help them rebuild the
Yeah.
economy. They wanted them in, but then they kicked them out when they didn't want them anymore. That's the
That's
I
difference.
true.
think with Zaitha's point before, and especially with Luckman's as well, that how he's talking about cultures disappearing. They're switching black people, brown people into white people. Like for example, who I can't remember. I think it's Beethoven.
Yeah,
Beethoven.
Beethoven, yeah.
It was every single picture you see of him. He's white. Why? Honestly, like
One
go on.
one of the biggest things is the thing that Sonny said, the Jesus being white. Like that is
Yeah.
such a big thing. White Spanish
Mm,
Jesus. That is a
mm.
massive thing.
Oh, you didn't say that, wasn't
Because
Oh,
no,
okay.
but
Oh,
that's
Lookman.
when you
Lookman.
think about that, that's crazy.
That is so crazy.
Because
That is actually one of the
you have
great
people
matters.
back then drawing pictures of him, and then you have Michelangelo in Italy in 1600s just decides to change the colour of his skin.
Yeah.
It's
So
that
what
that's
color, what color do you believe Jesus was?
no, scientifically he can't have been white.
He's
Yeah,
like Palestinian. Like Palestinian.
yeah.
People
So
know that.
like, I'd say he's like your sort of light, sort of Arab sort of
Yeah,
skin.
probably a
Yeah.
bit darker than me.
I think
The
Sam
thing is,
person
I think that Jesus was depicted to be white because all of the values
not
that
white.
sort of like white people have adopted, all of the values have sort of that the values derived from that tradition. So if they're like basing their values upon someone who's like supposedly brown or black, it wouldn't be seen something that's favorable for them.
Yeah.
But you can also say that
No.
Christianity became a very white religion, and then because Jesus was this like cornerstone of Christianity, then you have Jesus maybe being depicted as white.
Get pissed that like Jesus wasn't like American, and they sort of want him to be American.
Yeah.
They definitely want Jesus.
I agree.
You muted
They
yourself.
should.
You feel me on? You're saying you definitely want Jesus to be American or something.
Yeah. Like
Just funny, yeah.
I mean, I was
Yeah.
so before like I think the main way to tackle racism, honestly, I'm made ACS to look at these kind of problems, but we also have to identify the fact that we're still fighting amongst each other before we can fight against racism. So let's say in Africa, obviously, between Nigeria and South Africa, if a Nigerian goes to South Africa now, they will most likely die. They have we have a stigma against each other. Like I physically couldn't go to South America on the rugby tour because of that reason. So I think we really need to look at how we are as a society, that we have to come together. Like Armin said before, we need to look at a society to come together before we can kind of tackle other problems that we see.
Yeah, and the thing is like, but then you have white people back then, 1940s or whatever. You'd still have this no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. So you have Irish coming in and being discriminated against as well. The thing between discrimination between Irish and blacks is that there's a much more richer history of discrimination of blacks, which causes a lot more problems.
It's talking about solutions, right? We need to, as I said, you can divide racism into institutional and interpersonal, and we need to decide if what we're tackling first before you can find the sort of solution,
Yeah.
right?
I think the last like 70, 80 years or so, society's done a very good job of tackling interpersonal. And like 70 or 80 years ago, like we were walking about in Britain and stuff, we would get discriminated so much.
We'd get lynched.
Nowadays-
We would literally get
Yeah.
lynched.
And now, no, I don't think that bad, but like,
I mean, I would.
the way we would like, the way we'd be able to like talk to people, like if you tried to like go to a school like Cass, like decide to like, or me going to like campaign, decide to like engage in like these sort of ideas with like other people of that like level at the time, you just wouldn't be like, there'd be so much barriers against you and so much discrimination. So
At the
now,
same time, people are overdoing it now. Like it's become to that level where it's actually become a sort of form of people becoming more racist in their attempts to be anti-racist. And so, I mean, have you seen the sort of social justice, sort of pandering level of
that's mainly just Americans. Americans are
You get it here as well. You get it here as well.
Yeah, I think that's
in America, you get it a lot. You get it in America.
I think America, if I'm honest, America is a messed up country that needs to reset itself.
Dude,
Americans,
I'm not talking about positive discrimination. It's
liberals, so dumb.
yeah, I
Especially
think
because
like before with us
the
sexism before, right? We've been pushing, people have been pushing LGBT, having non-sexist, like pushing it, and it's got to the point that I think a lot of people end up fighting back because they pushed it so far. I think Sonny said before, like really early, that it's kind of a slow process rather than a fast one, because now we have with feminists, we have Joe with social media jokes like women should stay in the kitchen, that kind of thing. So I honestly I think we can be racist and even be anti-racist, but it gets to a point that that's why I'm kind of adding leading the question. At what point do we say it's too much that people end
Yeah,
up having backlash from it?
yeah,
Um,
that's a good
I mean,
I
point.
think
I think it's not necessarily the fact that it's being pushed so much. I think it's the fact that some of the ways and some of the policies and some of the things that people are doing are now becoming sort of backwards in
I
what
think
they're doing,
I think that's a question of
overcorrecting, sort of.
strategy. That's about strategy, and with
Mm,
like strategy, it's about how far you push it. It's not. It depends on what the way that you present your ideas. Like with America, and this is the problem, is what they done. Like especially like post 2016, like the anti SJW movement and like the memes and all that. Like that's when it really took off. Like in America, the like American liberals, and this was their strategy. They're so dumb. They take non-issues, things that really like no one really cares about, and it's not going to affect a lot of people. Like the whole thing about like the transgender toilets, make that like the main issue for like a week or 2 weeks, and then they're on to like the next thing. And it's like it got to a point in the 2016 election. There's an election. It was an election being fought between Trump and Clinton about should transgender people be allowed in female toilets. Like what kind of issue is that going to solve in a country where 60 million people don't even have healthcare,
It's
and they're saying that
blindsiding, isn't it? It's
yeah,
blindsiding them with
exactly,
the.
exactly. So
mm,
it's not about people won't say you're going too far if you're talking about like some guy getting murdered, or if you're talking about issues that people can see clearly matter. So it's about you have to frame it. You can't focus on like trying to win one battle. You have to focus on
yeah,
like winning the whole thing, and as well you have to link it to people. You can't like when people go around saying, "Oh, you have white privilege," you have white privilege. If you say that to like David Cameron, yeah, sure, he has white privilege. Say that to some guy who like used to be like, say that's like a single mom living in like
Yeah,
Dodgy or
Yeah.
something with like
yeah,
one benefit. So you can tell her she has white privilege. She's gonna see that, and then she's gonna see Tommy Robinson complaining about Muslims. She's gonna say, you know what, this guy makes a few good points. So
Yeah.
yeah. I
yeah,
think with the way that it's been found now, going back to feminism, their core idea was to make men equal to no, make women equal to men, right? But then it kind of the way it. I think it must be a lack of strategy or something. Parts of it evolved to being just anti-male, and I
Yeah.
think at that point when it gets to the point
That's the
of being
problem that sort of
anti,
but
becomes
that's
becoming
because
overcorrect.
feminism isn't like a global organization where people get together and decide what the next thing they're
Yeah.
going to do is. It's a
It's not
movement where people
unified,
do what they
yeah.
want.
concept like racism.
But it's the
It's a
same thing with race. Yeah, it's the same thing with
Yeah,
racism because people are not united on this as a sort of front, and because of that, you end up getting people who take it the sort of virtue signaling
yeah,
to a
yeah,
level of personal benefit rather than being sort of about the whole movement as a whole. It becomes about showing on Twitter, for example, Twitter, the cesspool that it
yeah,
is, right? Freaking with showing people that you are the good person, you are correct, and
yeah.
sort of like you make
social
it about
impact.
The worst day for me, I think, was the Blackout Tuesday. I went on Twitter, and you
yeah.
got people saying, "Oh, do a black screen." Then you got people saying, "Oh, no, don't do a black screen. It's performative." And people saying, "Nah, do a black screen, but use a different hashtag." So the people doing the protest, just complete nonsense. Like three people, like all trying to like outdo each other to see how woke each person can be. None
mm,
of them are gonna go out to protest. None of them like email your MP, uh, do a petition, like go outside and protest, smash a window, just do anything but that. Like literally, like the stuff that people are doing is just complete
yeah,
lack of
Mhm.
strategy, lack of
Yeah,
imagination, complete hopelessness. And then when someone who doesn't know anything about like experiencing racism or anything just sees on this like social media feed, everyone doing a black post, everyone doing a black post, everyone doing like all this stuff, and every single companies like Nike and Apple, Amazon are doing it. We're letting all these companies take control of the movement, and you've got suddenly people who come out with these ideas. Like I've seen people on Twitter say, like, we've got a Marxist establishment. We've got an establishment that says there's cultural Marxism in the UK, and we've got pro-Muslim establishment. That's literally what I've seen people say. Like these are the kind of ideas that are coming to the
Yeah. So
horse truck.
how do you think we should like?
Oof.
Oh.
She died. Rest in
So
peace,
how do you
man.
think we should do it in such a way that everyone can come together to kind of fix an issue rather than lots of different people? Because with like,
I don't mean
with
to be annoying, but I don't think you can.
yeah,
I think it's a
with the
generational thing.
lots of people having different opinions, different stuff. So uh, that begs the question: then, if we can't do that, how will we ever
I actually
stop
think
them?
that I'm quite optimistic in that I think that there can be change. Because if you think about it, lots of people forget that a lot of the things which have happened have come because of social mobilization. So
Yeah.
like people being able to vote, like the female, like females being able to vote, for example, females being able to vote, it wasn't given because of the generosity of like the white, like elitist
Yeah.
class, which is generous and they gave it. Like somebody literally tried to, like there was a woman,
Jumped
like
in front of the horse race, asking the
there
ascot.
was a woman who literally tried to kill Winston Churchill, push him onto a track in Bristol.
Yeah.
Like people have to actually work for these things. There has to be a social
Yeah.
mobilization. People have to work together. Like it didn't just come because of the general. Like black slaves weren't freed because of the generosity of the master.
Yeah. So
Literally.
yeah.
And the whole Wilberforce thing is pushed, and it's just like, well, no.
Yeah, like, literally, like slavery only ended because there were so many like uprisings and revolts by the slaves because they outnumbered the masters by so much. They
Yeah.
outnumbered them so much. They eventually started doing so many revolts and so many uprisings. They literally became non-profitable to have slaves. It didn't become profitable anymore because they were losing so much money because of the uprisings. So they were just
Yeah.
like, "Look, we're going to give black people the rights, but we're going to have enforced racism, so it's going to be implicit racism. So we're going to have and you know, as soon as the black people were given the rights and slavery was abolished, the white people literally bought like 200 million guns. As soon as that happened, they literally bought 200 million guns. Like they went into gated communities, they ran away from the black people, they segregated themselves, and they bought literally in America right now. You know how many guns they bought? 350 million guns. They've got more than a gun per person. Like a baby is expected to have more than a gun. That's how many guns there are, but that isn't just like coincidental. It isn't just all because guns are allowed in America, so there's loads of guns. But it's because like, do you think black people have got as many guns as white people? Like no. Like
Yeah.
white people have.
I mean, dude, yeah, where we don't know that. How
But and I think the thing is when you have a problem like that, you can't expect it to be a whole. Oh, if we do a movement, things will happen. I think it has to be, in my opinion, it's going to be a generational thing. What we have to do is we have to teach the current generation that those in power now have many, many problems with them, so that those that go in power in the future, that grow up from now, they have this whole memory in their head of, oh, all this happened. I have to make sure it doesn't happen again.
But also the problem of overcorrecting, the sort of virtue signaling, also comes from a lack of experience of the younger generation, who are the ones forefronting this movement, and it comes from a lack of experience and sort of
Yeah.
wanting to do good too much, and it's.
I think that's where we have to hope that the person
yeah.
who does come into power is the right one.
Yeah.
That's the
I think that the
problem.
people who do the virtual signaling are mostly people who are like, have you ever had a conversation in school and you've sort of taken an opinion which is sort of socialist, and somebody's been like, no man, you're too extreme. Just try and be like a bit more moderate. Try and be a bit more neutral. Like that opinion of like trying to be liberal, trying to be centrist, trying to be a bit more like in the middle. That
Yeah.
opinion, like that, like trying to be liberal, that's what causes this like virtue signaling, where we're just doing things for the sake of doing them. Like the feminist movement. The reason why the feminist movement was ruined, like even as a Muslim, for example, I believe in the fundamentals of the feminist movement. That when they started doing like the different waves of feminism, started doing these, it basically became a gimmick. Like it's a
Yeah.
bit like saying it in that way.
It became a
performative
joke.
once
It
again.
did become a
And
joke.
it's
Yeah,
performative once again, and it's not dealing with the actual institutional problem. And that's the same thing with racism. It doesn't deal with. I kind of want to take
I
that
think
point
the
back.
problem is almost social media, because you have people who go on like Instagram or TikTok and they just say silly things like, oh, name something good that a man can do and stuff like that, and then you have silly arguments and stuff. But then when that kind of thing gets hundreds of thousands of likes and it's seen by loads of people, then loads of people are like, oh, feminism just hates males. So I think you have the counter of it as well, where, yeah, there are parts of feminism that are anti-male, but then when those parts are seen more, you have lots of males who are just against feminism
It's
completely.
the small number who are the loudest. It's
Yes,
the small extreme
yes.
sort of sections that are the loudest.
No, the thing is as well, because like feminists, one of the biggest mistakes they make is that they don't like identify that their movement is the same as like the racist, like the anti-racist movement. That's the problem. Because if you think about it, like women will say that that men are privileged, and they're basically like oppressed. So that's what they'll say. But the problem is, like, if you compare, who's going to be more privileged, a white woman or a black man? So race has a thing to do with it as well. Like in America, how many like black people have been arrested because they've been convicted of like sexually assaulting or raping a white woman? Like literally, black people have been killed because of that stuff. Like being,
Yeah.
At the
And
same time,
6:15, by the way. So keep going.
okay,
Yeah.
no, but at the same time, there is they do oftentimes be like, oh, if you're not if you're a straight white man, right? So they always put those sort of three sort of thing labels together, straight cis white man, which means that they're trying to sort of. To be fair, the people who are included in that sort of feminism are also usually doing things with racism and transgender and all of that LGBT stuff. It's not like they sort of focus on one movement at a time. I don't think sort of disagree with your point on that.
I think also the way we look at like especially with the KKK, because while all of you were talking, I was listening as well, but I was also looking a bit about the KKK. You know, the KKK itself isn't actually labeled as a terrorist group, even though what they do can arguably be on the same lines as.
that's not wrong.
That's definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're along the lines of like, if I would honestly class them among
because people can what do you call it? People can like say, oh, that stuff happened back then when racism was normal, so it's okay.
Yeah, the KKK.
That's how people try and justify it.
KKK was one of the, like probably the biggest in America, the biggest mobilization of working class people working together.
Yeah.
But for what cause? If we have as big mobilization of people, but anti-racism as the people who joined the KKK movement, like back like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
We like there we have a solution. There we have some power.
But I think it's because everyone's scared to. Like, I know for us it's not as so much an issue, but for people who grew up in that time, they're scared to kind of unite in such a way to fight against.
Because you're Michael.
Go on. Yeah.
It's relating to our point. It's basically a continuation of our point. Like, sort of one of the things as well is that people are, and this I've seen this a lot. Like, I'm guessing it's probably in loads of other Asian countries and Arab countries. I've seen this in Egypt with my family when I talk to them. They sort of encourage you, and this is not their fault. This is being perpetuated by the people at the top. They want you to think this. They want to discourage you from thinking about politics, thinking about history, thinking about philosophy, thinking about science. They want to discourage you from thinking about these. So whenever like you bring up politics or something to like the average Egyptian, they'll just say, forget about that stuff. Just focus on your life. Forget about those things. They sort of like make you think. Focus on football. Focus on movies. Get distracted with consumerist culture. I don't think they'll like what you could do is like try and look up.
That's a fair point. I mean, it's controlling the control. Less they can question, less they control. More they control even. But yeah.
All right, we should probably end it there, lads.
Yeah, we've had a good hour 15 discussion.
Yeah, well,
Great.
My mom was
thanks for coming. You know, you made it to the end, so.
More doors were opened than closed in this.
Honestly,
Yeah, that's always going to happen with someone like this.
That's the whole point of the conversation.
with ACS itself, as a society, like, obviously I want to keep going with it, but obviously it's hard for us now, especially because all of us are doing IB except for Ryan.
Wait, Michael, did you record this?
Huh?
Did you record this?
No.
Oh, I did.
Oh, okay, go on.
Well, I did because I'm doing a similar like thing at my own school, so I wanted to use it.
No, because me and my brother joined this like after you guys were. How did you organize it? You just said like, oh, we're gonna do a chat, and that's it.
Well, actually, we were planning on doing a Zoom, but then Ryan couldn't join, and then school regulations, you can't make a Zoom outside of school. So
Yeah, you can even get Zooms. You can make guest Zooms for Ryan. You need to get
But that
teaching
requires
involved.
organisation, Hasefa, and we did not have
Very
So
good.
it's gonna be like a regular thing, like a regular podcast thing.
yeah,
That is it, you know. Turn it into a podcast.
but
I think it should be longer, to be honest. I think it should be like a couple of hours.
yeah,
Man, we talked the entire time.
Mahmoud and his brother are just there talking the whole
Yeah,
time.
should do 1 hour just for the dude.
Yeah, I want to know. Me and my brother was thinking of doing a podcast together, Me and my brother were thinking of doing a podcast, but since
I
we didn't
kept, I
really know
kept thinking of doing the same thing, but it's like you need people who will actually like go in and do it properly.
We're just like,
Oh, bro, I'm down for all of your podcasts.
Hey, I've already recorded this, bro, so it's calm.
Calm.
Yeah,
right, send it.
Yeah, just send the
Yeah,
link.
I'll make like an unlisted thing on YouTube.
Okay, yeah, and then I'll probably link it. Well, I mean, next week, I'm not sure about ACS next week. I mean, if you guys are down for ACS next week, I don't really mind.
I don't mind.
And then let's talk about when we come back from school. Obviously, we won't ride in both. So
Yeah, drive it down, bro. Come down also.
doing like
We're going to have Ryan. We're going to have Ryan video call with us.
Hey fam, just during lunchtimes I go off by myself in the corner.
Like presentations and stuff, like actual things. So I mean, it will have to generally see when the time comes. If I'm honest, well, there's only so much we can do.
Do you think even when school comes back, it might be better to keep it as a podcast?
Yeah,
I think so. That's why. But I do want to get like. That's why I said I want to give you guys food, honestly.
Come.
So I mean, sometimes we can like very odd, like 4 weeks or so, or like a month into like ACS, we can have like a group kind of. What?
It sounds for?
Afro-Caribbean Society.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's
But,
Which is why I was talking today.
yeah. Yeah.
There's only one black person in the entire call.
It's fine.
We said this.
Your mic keeps cutting out like every millisecond. I'm not even gonna lie.
Nobody's going. Where's is it calling out for everyone?
No, it's fine now. Just keep talking now, please.
That's the thing, though. Like, even if there's one person, the entire solution is to have like social mobilization where every single group is uniting together.
Yeah.
That's the whole point that like my brother was making about how the rich, they're happy to sell arms to each other and meet each other and like sort of like have like racial integration with the rich. But they don't want racial integration with the poor. They want division with the poor. They want like me saying, "Oh, you're chinky, you're packy." They want me to be saying that.
Yeah. You're not wrong. Yeah.
That's literally what they want me to be saying.
It's the whole divide and conquer thing. Yeah.
When you get like a white working class guy calling someone an N-word, like they're very happy. Yeah, like keep it up.
Fam, but if you have a black guy calling a white guy like a honker or something, everyone goes mad.
The fuck's a honker?
What's a honker?
It's like some really old thing from Jamaica.
I've heard of Twinkie, man.
I thought it was a wonky for white people. I don't know.
It's like a Jamaican white slur.
Mr. Terrorism in the chat for you.
A person or a thing that honks.
But yeah, I might say the wrong word here.
Guys, what do you make of the point that in America every single person is described as like African American, Asian American?
Fam, yeah, and like half of them, the African Americans, half of them ain't even from Africa.
Yeah, no, exactly. But everyone's called that: African American, Latino American, Asian American.
Yeah.
But white people are not called European American. They're just labeled as white.
That's such a big thing, you know, because Americans aren't American. They just aren't.
Yeah, to be fair, the only Americans are Native Americans. And they're called Native Americans. They're not called Americans.
That is such a good point. Actual Americans aren't called Americans, they're called Native Americans. That's
bro.
Mad. That's actually mad.
They're an ethnic minority. The actual Americans are an ethnic minority.
And how many of them are left? Like 50,000 or something?
It's ridiculous, bro.
Is there any other country in the world where immigration and colonization has actually resulted in something as big as America?
No, that's the thing.
I don't think that's an example of that. That's like insane. That's an insane example.
It genuinely is where, you know how I was talking about fearing, people coming to your country and taking your culture?
Yeah.
The Pakistan example.
That is America.
America, that is it.
Guys,
It's white people.
for another time next week, so we have something more
Yeah,
to
to
talk
be
about.
fair, we should.
Keep going like.
Alright, I need to go actually eat. Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Right.
If anyone wants to stay, I can stay.
What's different?
We'll discuss the whole of racism in 2 hours.
Alright, that's been a bit.
No,
Yes, yeah.